Hello and welcome back. So I was just playing around making some combat simulators for the early fights in Slay the Spire 2, and the data ended up just being way too cool not to share. So this video is going to go in depth into that. And something I realized when looking at the data is I finally found a way to quantitatively explain something that I've been trying to get across for so long. So we'll talk about that more towards the end of the video. First, we're just going to go explaining like what we're looking at here. So this is a plot of different outcomes that can happen when you're fighting the Nibbit. And what I was testing is how effective these four different, essentially, combat strategies are in different fights. So three of them might be familiar to you. Block first is probably the strategy that most new players employ when they're playing the game, which is just you block until you're not taking any damage, and then you play some attacks. But what most people realize is when you're doing that, you can actually see this long tail where you have a lot of fights where you take a lot of damage. Enemies scale their strength up. So if you're playing too passively for too long, their attacks are going to get really strong and you're going to end up taking really big hits. So the next strategy most players gravitate towards is like minimizing overblock. So for example, if the Nibbit's attacking for 11, you would block for 10, take the 1, and then just move on with your life, instead of blocking for 15 to prevent the 1 damage. Another strategy, just for comparison, is attack first, which is just playing all your attacks, and then if you run out, then you play some defense. That tends to be pretty poor, especially on the early fights, but there actually is one fight where it is optimal, or better than the blocking strategies, so you'll see that later. MC rollout requires a bit of explanation. This is the look ahead strategy. So this is basically someone who's planning for future turns. And so the MC rollout stands for Monte Carlo Rollout. There's a lot of interesting stuff about this strategy, but basically what I want to share is you look at what potential options you can play on the current turn. And what MC rollout does is it takes a bunch of candidate plays and it looks at what will happen in the future if you make that play. And then based on those features, it takes the plays and looks at what happens in the future of those plays and keeps going and going. Notably, it doesn't have perfect information, so when it says looks at the future, it does like a statistics on the cards in your deck and your discard pile to know what likely outcomes are going to happen. So it's not like this perfectly simulates the game. This is the same type of algorithm you could employ if you're playing the game, just like what's in my deck, what could I draw, what does the enemy's attack look like, what could I draw next turn, and so on. So if you want to learn more about this, there's a ton of cool resources out there for stochastic, like decision-making algorithms like this. But basically what I want to get across is this is just looking ahead to future turns and seeing the consequences of the action you're planning to take. And then it weights over all possible outcomes, like what is the expected value of taking this action, not just on the current turn, but looking at all future turns, or in this case, I looked ahead like 3 or 4 turns. And then picking the one that has the best outcome across the entire fight, not just currently. So those are the 4 algorithms. One more thing to get across. The actual data from the fights looks like this because it's discrete, right? You're taking 13, you're taking 18. And just the way the game works, the data is very quantized because you're not really taking like 14 or 15 damage that often. Sometimes you're taking 16 if the fight gets really weird. But just due to the nature of like defense blocking for 5 and enemies attacking for set damages, the data is very discrete or quantized. But I didn't think this was the most pleasant to look at, so I dequantized the data for something that's more visually representative of what you're looking at. Like it's easier to just see what's happening. Technically, this is lying, right? There's no actual probability of damage taken on like 14, 15, or 17. So just keep in mind, this is just kind of showing the general trends of the fights. In my opinion, it's much easier to look at, but the real fights are more kind of messy like this. Okay, all that out of the way, let's just get into the data. Fuzzy Wurm Crawler is the one I simulated first. As the easiest fight, I think, in the game, it has 2 attacks. It attacks for 4 or 6 based on your ascension, and then it gains 7 strength. And it goes Acid Goop, Inhale, Acid Goop, and then it repeats. So you'll get 2 attacks in a row. And so here's the simulation results on Ascension 8. You'll notice Min Overblock and MC Rollout are basically the same performance because looking ahead doesn't get you that much benefit in this fight. So on low Ascension, there's really no punishment from just using like, what can I do this turn? And that's it on this fight. You just want to be efficient, kill him quickly. Blocking first is definitely not optimal. You see this long tail. If you play far too passively, you can end up getting hit for like he attacks for 13 and then for 20. If you get into the 20 hit category with this guy, you're going to have some problems. So playing 2 passively on this fight is a recipe for disaster, and then attack first, generally just pretty bad. Don't do that. When you get to Ascension 9 and Ascension 10, there is some optimization to be had for looking ahead. It's not much, but it definitely gets slightly more beneficial to do that. Block first gets even worse because now his base attack is slightly higher, so you're just taking even more damage. Like, you can't just block all of the damage. So if you compare, like, on Ascension 8, optimal play doesn't do anything. Optimal play saves a little bit on higher ascensions, and you can just see in general how much harder the fight gets. Like, you're taking on average 4 more damage for like the basic algorithms. Block first in particular gets really punished on higher ascensions, which could be why people find Ascension 9 as a brick wall, because if you're using some of the suboptimal strategies, the damage is significantly higher than if you're playing optimally. You're only taking like 3 or 4 more damage. Next up is the Nibbit. Love this dude. Probably the cutest enemy. It has 3 attacks. It does 1 big hit, then it does a hit in blocks, then it gains strength, and it just repeats that over and over again. So on Ascension 8, we are seeing this fight's a little bit more complex. Planning ahead has some benefits. It's not significant on low ascensions, but it is there. Notably, blocking first on Nibbits. If you're trying to full block every hit, you're just going to end up taking a lot of damage because he scales up so much that it's hard to prevent damage from the later attacks. So playing optimally, minimizing overblock is good enough on Ascension 8. When we get to Ascension 9 and Ascension 10 though, min overblock, you're averaging taking like 11 damage per fight doing that. Whereas if you're playing optimally now, you're saving quite a bit of health just by looking ahead and planning your turns more carefully. Worth mentioning that I keep saying optimally. This isn't actually true optimal. This is like a noisy version of the optimal algorithm. The true optimal damage you can take is actually 8 on this fight if you look at all possible futures and do all the math for every single possible play. I chose this kind of noisy one because this is as close as like humans will get, because you're not going to be able to do millions of computations in your head like every single fight. So when I say optimal, I mean within reason optimal, not the mathematically best fight. Because the mathematically best fight averages 8 damage against Ascension 9 Nibbits. Worth mentioning as well, this is with the Ironclad deck. So you would get 6 heal afterwards. So when you compare Ascension 8 to Ascension 9, things are kind of interesting. Attack first actually doesn't get that punished from going to higher ascension. Block first gets a little bit worse, but it's only like 3 damage less. But you just get an increase in unavoidable damage. Like, they all go up by like 3 total damage. So those are for the simple fights. We can see a little bit of benefit for playing optimally. But then I was curious what happens with elites. And so for these fights, obviously you're not just going to take an elite with the starting Ironclad deck. So I added 2 ultimate strikes and 2 ultimate defends to the starting deck just to give you a sense of like, this is maybe a deck that could take on an elite. It's a very simplified example, but I felt like this was about the minimum you would have going into an elite fight to have some chance of winning the fight. So we'll start with Skulking Colony. It has 4 attacks. It does damage, then it does damage and blocks, then it does damage and gains strength, and then it does a multi-hit. And the most important thing is you can only do 15 damage to this every single turn. So, as expected, attack first isn't very strong because eventually you're just going to be doing damage that doesn't actually hurt this thing. But we're seeing actually a very clear benefit for the MC rollout algorithm. Like, you're saving 15 damage in this fight just by planning your turns ahead. And that's on Ascension 8. So actually, another interesting thing is the full blocking strategy against this dude is actually more beneficial than minimizing overblock. Not entirely sure why that is, but it does have a slight advantage. Probably because just the way his numbers are, he attacks for like 14 a lot of the time. So minimizing overblock, you're just taking 4 damage every turn, kind of unavoidably maybe. But when you get to Ascension 9, MC Rollout has such a significant advantage over the other strategies. And literally, I saw this graph and I was like, I have to make a video talking about this because I get so many comments from people saying elites are impossible. I don't know what's happening. How do I fight elites? This is what's going wrong with so many people in elite fights. It's not the cards you have. It's not the luck you're having. It's not the relics you're getting from the chest. It's literally just how you're playing the fights can save like 33 health in a combat, or 23 I guess in this case. No, yeah, it's 33. And so this is what I wanted to talk about basically, and that's so incredible. Like optimal play on Ascension 8 saves like 15 damage. You can get by taking 22 damage with a pretty bad deck. Like any realistic scenario where you're fighting this guy, your deck will be stronger than just the starting deck with 2 ultimate strikes and 2 ultimate defends. But you can get through this fight without taking that much damage. And even using the basic strategies on Ascension 8, you can kind of get through, you take a little bit of damage, it's not that bad. But this is why Ascension 9 is a brick wall for so many people. If you look at the damage you take using basic, like just looking at what's in my hand strategies, it essentially doubles on Ascension 9. And I think this is why so many people are dying on elites, because this is terrifying. You are not going to succeed fighting elites with this strategy. But there is a way to fight elites without taking nearly as much damage just by looking ahead and planning the fight. And that's what I wanted to get across in this video. Let's talk about Byrdonis. This dude just has 2 attacks. Attack for 17 or 19, and then 3x3 or 4x3 hit, and it gains 1 strength every single turn. And here again we see, first of all, the attack first is actually the best, like, simple strategy against Byrdonis, which I definitely appreciate. So if you don't know what you're doing in this fight, and you want to have the best shot, just playing all of your attacks will take less damage on average than trying to block at all will benefit you. So just pushing damage is so important in this fight. But looking ahead and planning your fight can save quite a bit of damage, right? If you're just playing optimally on Ascension 8, you're taking about half as much damage as just using, like, just looking at the cards in your hand and just playing the cards in your hand. You take twice as much damage doing that than you would just playing the fight. And it gets even worse on Ascension 9. Like, this becomes essentially untenable. Like, you cannot take 77 damage in a fight and continue playing. But if you're playing optimally, you only take like 38. So not as good as the other ones. I think if the deck was better, you could save more health playing optimally. But like, again, optimal play on Ascension 9 against Byrdonis with the same deck saves 38.5 damage in this fight. And if we go back to Skulking Colony, like 32.8. This is a point that I've been trying to make for so long. It's not the cards you have in your deck, it's how you're playing the cards that matters so much. And I think there's not enough emphasis placed on just slowing down and planning the fight. This is like the biggest win percentage leak that many people have, because they're just playing too quickly, they're not planning ahead, and this is so much savings. So I have a whole video about how to play optimally in a fight. I'll link it in the description. It's too much to cover in this video, but the purpose of this video was just showing you in data how important it is to play fights carefully and methodically, because you're leaving, like, it turns this fight from something that's impossible to not that bad. If you have like a fire potion or another potion, you can end up getting out of this taking like 10 damage. It's not that bad. So watch this video if you want to learn how to play fights optimally. And just the general, if you're not going to watch that video, I would just say come into the fight with a damage plan. Look ahead 1 to 2 turns. Ask, not only can I kill the enemy this turn, can I kill the enemy next turn or the following turn? And how can I make my plays? Like, what is the enemy going to attack like? How can I plan my plays around what the enemy is going to do? And just slow down. Take a couple extra seconds every time and be like, okay, I'm going to think about this fight instead of just playing what's in my hand. Because we've seen the data, there's so much benefit to doing it. If you like this video, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.